I'm Allison Van Dyke, and I'm the Executive Director of the Temple of Understanding. And I want to welcome you to this series, Eco Justice for All series by the Temple of Understanding. Today, we are going to be talking about resilient communities through agriculture. This series is an ongoing program of the Temple of Understanding, which is a 63-year-old interfaith organization whose mission is to advocate for interfaith values in the secular setting of the United Nations and around the world. Our focus for the past 12 years has been to increase the awareness of our religious leaders and actors of the climate crisis that we are facing and its negative impact on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In particular, we work on peace, justice, human rights, women's health and safety, food sovereignty, and environmental sustainability. That gives us a wide range of topics to cover. It is my pleasure today to welcome Jayne Henson, who is our moderator. Jayne is going to introduce Costa Boutsikaris, and also Laura Legnick and Karen Washington. Over to you, Jayne.
Great, thank you so much, Allison. So as Allison said, my name is Jayne Henson. I am the owner operator of TransGenerational Farm, which is a small diversified vegetable farm in the Hudson Valley with a mission of connecting LGBTQ folks to rural spaces and agriculture. Yeah, I got started farming. My family farms conventionally in Kansas, and then I moved to New York and found my way back into agriculture, into more sustainable, organically minded agriculture. So that's a little bit about me, but let's go ahead and have our panelists introduce themselves. How about we do Karen, and then Lauren, and then Costa.
Hi, everybody. My name is Karen Washington. My pronouns are she, her, Mama K. I am a co-owner of Rise and Root Farm up in Chester, New York, started by 4 of us. We are women. 2 of us are women of color. 3 of us are LGBTQ women. We grow food according to justice. I'm also the co-founder of Black Urban Growers, which is an organization that's lifting up both urban and rural growers, and also the co-founder of Black Farmer Fund, which is a fund to help Black farmers and businesses gain capital. Thanks for having me.
Hi, I'm Laura Legnick. I'm trained as a soil scientist, and I serve as the Director of Agriculture at the Glynwood Center for Regional Food and Farming, which is based in the Mid-Hudson Valley of New York. I'm based in Asheville, North Carolina, and so my work spans kind of Hudson Valley and also the Southern Appalachians. And Glynwood works for the just transformation of the food system through 3 main strategies. The first is training farmers. The second is building coalitions of stakeholders or leaders in the food system. And the third is working on innovative ways to assure food sovereignty, access to food, and also food sovereignty. And I'm really happy to be here today.
Costa, how about you do a quick intro for us?
Hey, my name's Costa Boutsikaris. I'm a filmmaker and farmer based here in the Hudson Valley. The 2 documentaries I worked on that we'll be talking about a little bit today. The first one is promoting and exploring the ideas of permaculture and ecological design. And more recently, we worked on and finished a film about Indigenous land management perspectives. So we'll be sharing a little bit more about that today. Thanks.
Great. So I guess our broad topic today is resilient agriculture. And Laura actually wrote a book called Resilient Agriculture. So I'm kind of, to kick us off, I'd kind of like to get her just like kind of broad stroke sweeping ideas of the topics that she's explored in that, and some of the things that, Laura, what are some of the things that you feel like need to be at the front of our minds when we start talking about a topic like resilient agriculture?
Well, thanks. I've spent last 15 years really focused on working with farmers and ranchers across the country to understand what resilient agriculture is. And particularly, I've spent a lot of time and thought on bringing together the science of resilience. It's a specific kind of science called social ecological resilience, and then testing those ideas, those scientific ideas, by talking with farmers and ranchers around the country. And it's pretty clear to me from this work and what these farmers have taught me is that they are thinking about resilience, and they might not use that word. The other thing is that based on this work, which has involved hundreds of farmers and ranchers around the country, is there are 3 rules of resilience that these farmers and ranchers tend to follow. And so I thought, just to get us started, or to set a context for the conversation, I just wanted to share a little bit of that, and also share what a resilient agriculture looks like. And so I'll do that first, and then I'll follow up with these 3 rules, although they'll be pretty clear in my description. So based on what I'm hearing from all over the country and really all over the world, although my work is focused in the US, is that the first characteristic of resilient agriculture is that it will rest on a foundation of a nationally integrated network of regional food sheds. So what this means is that we will no longer be eating from a global food system, but rather eating from a food system that is primarily focused on feeding regions. There will be some integration of this network, but it will be regional food sheds. The second is that these food sheds will be diverse landscapes that promote ecological, social, economic, and spiritual health of land, people, and community. So this is a second major transition that will need to take place in order to cultivate resilient agriculture. And we'll dig into what a diverse landscape means, and certainly some of these ideas around the well-being, spiritual, ecological, social well-being. And then the third thing is that these landscapes have to have enough diversities. So this is very carefully planned, designed, and managed diversity to promote 2 other key features of resilience, and that is regional self-reliance. And what that means is that these regional food systems will not need to import energy or materials, and they will not need to export products and waste. So they'll have enough diversity to promote regional self-reliance and also to accumulate community-based, community-controlled wealth. And when I speak of wealth, I'm speaking of much more than just financial wealth. It's wealth of healthy natural resources, healthy people. It's the wealth that communities need to promote innovation, regional innovation. So in this description, I've actually expressed these 3 rules of resilience, which have really jumped out as I've done this work over the last 15 years. The first rule is to design and manage communities, so this is land and people, to promote reciprocal relationship, mutually beneficial relationship, respectful relationship between people and land, people and people, and all the other beings that live on that land. The second is to promote regional self-reliance, as I've already described. And the third is to promote the commonweal. that word, it's an old word. I think it's been very useful to me in my work. The commonweal is a word that my ancestors used to describe healthy communities that had the resources that they needed to sustain their well-being over time. So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you so much, Laura. Costa, so in a lot of your films, you talk a lot about permaculture as a tool and as a philosophy. I think a lot of us have probably like heard permaculture like in the recent usage, but I'm curious to get your kind of like just like general overview of what that philosophy is and how you see it helping to develop like resilient agriculture.
Great. Yeah. So in 2014, I took a permaculture design course, and that really inspired me. I was also in film school at the time. So I decided to take the opportunity to visit a bunch of permaculture farms, designers, different systems, and film them and put together a documentary that kind of looked at what permaculture looks like in all these different landscapes. As you said, some of us might know a definition of it, but it's hard sometimes to really ground down what it is. So a definition I like to go by is kind of the foundation of the word started with putting together permanent and agriculture, or permanent and culture, and trying to think about how can we be permanent in the sense of the way an ecosystem is permanent. So how can we look at the ecology of the landscape we're in and design our human systems based on some of the principles of those systems. So permaculture is kind of a design science, basically, that helps us design systems. And it's mostly used for agriculture to look at the landscape. How does the ecology already work on the landscape, and how can we tap into that kind of natural power? But it's also used to design things like homes and waste systems and gardens and kind of different scales of human systems. The design science of permaculture and kind of the textbooks were written in the 1970s by two Australian guys, Bill Mollison being the leading one. And from there, it kind of was taught as a way to improve our design of food systems and human systems. And it's really taken different shapes across, especially the Northeast where I've gotten to visit. So in the film, we look at everything from human manure composting from our toilets onto our fruit trees, things like perennial systems where we have staple crops coming from trees like chestnuts and hazelnuts, in between the alleyways of our vegetable crops. We look at also urban systems, looking at rooftop gardens in New York City, where there's almost 1 million acres of square feet, across just the rooftops. And there's just so many opportunities to bring living systems into our human environment already that can really bolster and buffer what we're doing. So that's kind of what that film is about, Inhabit a Permaculture Perspective. It's really looking at how does permaculture look like in all these different landscapes. So it's not just to make our farming more resilient like an ecosystem is, but it's also to look at how do we design our homes and our energy and our waste streams to act more cyclical, kind of just like Laura was talking about. How do we think about regionally adapted systems that work in the places that we're in? So I could kind of transition too, because after making that film about permaculture, it wasn't until after I made the film where I started to learn a lot more about how these men in Australia actually took a lot of indigenous systems from the Aboriginal peoples of Australia and really incorporated that into permaculture. And although they did give a bit of credit, there was not enough credit due that a lot of these systems are based on traditional ecological knowledge of indigenous peoples of Australia. So I wanted to move forward in my work trying to highlight, uplift, and give more platform for Native voices. So we ended up getting tied into another project called INHABITANTS, an Indigenous perspective. And that film looks at 5 different tribal communities doing land management projects that are kind of dealing with climate change in their landscapes, but also dealing with restoring traditional land use management, things like restoring buffalo back to the plains, bringing food forests back to the native forests of Hawaii, prescribed fire management in California, and a few other examples. So for me, it's been a journey of learning about permaculture as this some people think of as a new idea, and then kind of digging deeper into indigenous management and a lot of the incredible work that's happening on tribal land.
Great, thank you. I think when I started thinking about this topic of resilient agriculture, one of the things that always I come back to is thinking about farmers and the kind of creating resiliency like within our communities, and that kind of like justice mindset. Karen, when I was living in the city, your writings around food apartheid, they really inspired me to get involved in agriculture from a community organizing standpoint. And I just found like your work to be really inspiring around that. And I'm really hoping that you can share with us kind of like also I'm a huge fan of Rise and Root Farm. You guys are amazing. I love all the things that you do. And so can you kind of like fill us in on the work that you do and how you see that kind of affecting resiliency from like a cultural justice standpoint, or really anything that you want to talk about? Oh, you're on mute, Karen.
Anything I want to talk about, but I'm glad to be here because I think some of the things that Laura and Costa have been talking about when it comes to resiliency and getting more involved in nature. My job as a farmer and an activist is to find out who is impacted, and many of the systems that are in place, agricultural systems that are in place, food systems that are in place, affect marginalized communities of color who don't have a seat at a table and don't have a voice in what is happening, and yet they are the people that are going to be impacted. So for me, when we talk about food and food systems for so long, been working in silos, especially in cities. You work in silos because of the fact that there's a need to be fed. And what I found out is that we cannot work with just food alone because food impacts so many different social issues within communities of color in urban areas. Food impacts health, it impacts economics, and it impacts environment, it impacts housing, education, and getting people to understand the impact that food has. I mean, for so long, people have been complacent. They relied on the government and lobbyists to control their food systems without even questioning the food that they eat. They go in and purchase food with labels of different types of ingredients that they can't pronounce, and yet they put that in their body. And so for me, I have been very proactive in really uplifting the voices of the voiceless for so long. And when we talk about diversity and inclusion in this food system, what I sort of are taken back is the fact that there's limited diversity when it comes to people of color that are growing food. We live in a country where 98% of farmland are owned by whites, and only 1%, 1 to 2% are owned by people of color. And so when we talk about this sort of food system resiliency, we need to also think about who's growing the food. Think about, and when we talk about community and culture, we need to talk about who's growing the food and then who doesn't have the benefit of growing the food. Because how can we move forward when we talk about resiliency, we talk about culture, we talk about food system, we talk about biodiversity, permaculture, all these factors. When I look at the broad sense of agriculture, I'm missing in that puzzle. I'm missing, I'm not being seen in that sort of foreseeable future of what a resilient agriculture system and food systems is going to look like. And so, you know, I'm on this journey when I'm in spaces like this, is to make sure that when we talk about that, we have a mindset of what needs to be done and who's being left out. I coined the term food apartheid because people for so long have been pointing to my communities and communities like mine that we live in a food desert. And so, I mean, again, folks, what does that mean, living in a food desert? The fact that we don't have food, or we have limited access to food, or we don't have supermarkets, or we have to travel long distances. But we don't talk about the heart of the problem. And I coined the term food apartheid because I wanted people to start listening at our food system, peeling away the construct of our food system and look how it impacts people of color, how it impacts economics, how it impacts where you live, and start having those hard conversations that we need to have. And so my work has really taken, upon this new attitude of inclusion, of a diversity, but not a diversity of plants and animals, but a diversity of farmers. And so I just want to make sure that when we talk about this new regional food system that is going to, again, be mindful of climate change and be mindful of resources, who are the people who are going to be growing that food and who are the people who are going to be benefit of the food? Because for so long, we have a system of haves and have-nots. We have a system where a lot of the architect is being done by academics and people with power and privilege. And yet the voices that need to come to a common community, a common table, are not at that table. So I'm going to stop with that.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. Yeah, a lot of what you say really resonates with me in certain ways about like being trans. And when I look at the landscape of rural spaces and I look at like what's happening legislatively like around the country in a lot of rural places, a lot of like, I'll just say red states, and the laws that are being passed to like literally like legislate trans people out of existence. I'm always brought to like, how can we actually like be involved? How can we actually be a seat at that table when the power structures around us are like actively keeping us out of those things? And I know for a lot of BIPOC or all BIPOC folks in America, like that has been the norm, like from the beginning of America. And I think as long as we all should be keeping that like at the front of our minds. I guess now I kind of want to move us into like, let's start talking in like big ideas, right? Like, let's start talking in how do we see, what are things that we can do? How do we create these sustainable and regenerative communities? And how do we look at, especially in the face of things like climate change and legislation and all that stuff that's really trying to, I don't know, kind of get in the way of justice. How do we start to take these things down? I want to start with Karen, kind of just build more on like what you were saying before, if you don't mind,
Yes,
and then we'll go to Laura.
Can we just get the political lawyers and stuff out of the system? I mean, can we just do away with that? Because they have so much freaking control of our food system, and yet, 7.8 billion people is on this planet. And yet a handful of people are controlling our food system. Big companies, lawyers, and lobbyists. Get these people out. I tell people, especially in urban areas, it's time for people to get off their butts and be more proactive instead of reactive. We have people, big business companies controlling our food system of 7.8 billion people on this earth. We have like small companies patent our seeds. Come on, folks. So how can we start being proactive instead of reactive? How do we start in one essence, work on regenerative practices, but also work on policy and changing things. And for so long, we have been complacent. And you see how rules are changing. You see how we're starting to go back, back 10, 20 years. And so now is the time where we're starting to see how this is impacting the quality of life for all of us. It's for us now, to take it to the front lines, to be outspoken, to be activists, to be advocates for justice. And for so long, we have sat back and we have watched companies just continue to take the work of organics and use it and turn it and twist it for their benefits, to put in ingredients that are harmful to our being, to allow pesticides and insecticides to be promoted on airways and in our food and in our soil. We have to stop the nonsense, and it has to come from the voices of so many of us that are impacted. We talk about climate change. We're talking about a way to make the earth and the world better. Is that we have to stop the madness and again, put these legislative people to the fire, get them out of controlling our voices. There's so many people who are against what they're doing, the suicidal components they're doing against our environment, against climate change, not understanding, not believing it, calling it fake news. It's about time for us to really look at the truth, go to the truth, and to dismantle a system of ignorance. So I guess I got you started on the fire, so I just lit it. So continue with the flames.
All right, I'll take on those flames, Karen. Thank you. Yes, hallelujah. And from my perspective, the way to get started is to get started. Just like you said, get off your butt and get started. I framed my example of resilient agriculture very broadly in the opening. But what I know from what I've learned is that we just all have to get working on changing the food system. And we can all, no matter what, because we all eat, we all stand in the food system, and we can do something to help create this transition to a just food system. My own thinking about the problem at hand, or the shorthand that I use when I'm thinking about this, is literally we need to decolonize the food system. That's a word that fits for me. And what does that mean if it's a new idea and you haven't heard about it? Basically, it means moving from a 17th or 16th century attitude towards land, people, and community, and moving into a 21st century attitude that is, or understanding that so goes the land, so goes people, so go us all. We are all connected, and we need to begin thinking, we need to live into that reality, which we now know. We are our communities, our political systems, our business systems are literally using 300-year-old ideas, at least 300-year-old ideas. And my work involves inviting us to move and step into the 21st century, recognize that we are citizens of this planet, we are earthlings, and that we need healthy environment, healthy community, healthy people, in order to be well ourselves. How do we do that more practically? This idea of a national network of regional food systems, what it looks like on the ground is food being grown in diverse gardens by diverse people in cities, in suburbs, in the countryside, and that we work together across those different landscapes to make sure that we're not only producing healthy, nutrient-dense food for all, but that we are also doing this in a way that creates reciprocal relationship, respectful relationship across the food system.
Thanks, Laura. Costa, feel free to add some of your thoughts as well.
Sure. Just going off what she was just speaking to about decolonizing the food system, our work of the past few years, working with Indigenous communities to try and tell and help kind of support them telling their stories about these issues. The land back movement is also a really important piece of this, I think, and something that if folks don't know about, definitely worth looking into. But as more Native communities are reclaiming a lot of their ancestral territory and getting opportunities to bring back land management onto their ancestral lands, we're also seeing this direct relationship with increase in biodiversity, increase in climate resilience, and all of these things that Native communities have been dealing with for millennia. There's been all types of climate change happening over thousands and thousands of years, and a lot of these systems, like managing buffalo herds, which are, thousands of times more resilient than cattle. They shed their warm winter coat every spring. They can go without water for 4 or 5 days. I mean, there's so many incredible examples of Native American food systems that are so much more resilient and also really heal the land and the soil in a lot of ways. So I think just to add into that, there's a lot of exciting opportunities to support land back and help bring more native guidance into this kind of it back into the American food shed. And one of the resources I think is really helpful, it's called the Native Land Mapping Tool. And the website is native-land.ca, and we can put a link to that in the show notes here. But basically, you can put your address in, and it shows you ancestral territory of the communities the land that you're living on, and also links you to tribal government pages and websites and different ways to maybe support those communities or start to build a relationship and learn more about the land that you live on.
If I could jump into, thanks for talking about specifics. That is what I've done in the last decade or so, is really begun to collect examples of how the kinds of changes that are needed in order to achieve this just transformation of the food system. And so if you're interested in looking at some of the examples that or some of the people that have taught me what they're doing, you can go to Real World Resilience, it's all one word, realworldresilience.com, and hear stories of some of the farmers and ranchers that I've been working with. I totally agree, reparation is a big part of the solution. And how we do that, I don't know. I know that I bring it up in my own work and in the circles I travel in, and there's crickets. It's a really, really difficult idea for white people. And so my own work, I feel that where my work lies is with my own people. And so that's where I'm working to try to bring this idea of decolonization, bring these ideas of reparation and what that means, and help people who have the advantages, who have the privilege, help them work through, do the work they need to begin to really honestly look at not just the food system, but our culture in general, but specifically working within food. I've actually found that it's food, as Karen said, it's so important to so many aspects of our culture and our lives that it's actually a pretty useful focus for doing some of this bigger cultural change work like decolonization. So just to wrap this thought up, there are so many inspiring, smart, effective actions going on in this country, all over the world. And so maybe a first step, I said, get off your butt, get working in community, but maybe the first step is take a little time to see what others are doing, because I know when I do that, I am so inspired by that work. And it can help me begin to think about what I can do in my own community, who I might reach out to in my own community to begin, who's already doing this work in my community. So really encourage that as well.
That's great. And that leads us right into kind of like our last piece, which is for everyone, what's kind of like your call to action for everybody here? I think, I'll start off. I think that right now in the Hudson Valley, we are dealing with kind of like an unprecedented like housing and land access issue. As more and more people move up from the city, as more and more people build second homes, as we look at things like Airbnbs and we look at things like development. One of the things that everybody talks about, they love so much about the Hudson Valley, is the agriculture. And yet we're not putting in place like really like foundational structures to make sure that agriculture stays here in terms of land access. The older generations, of the longtime farmers are starting to age out, and younger farmers are coming in to take up that mantle, but so much of us are really struggling with finding housing and finding land to do the things that we want. And we end up in lease agreements where we make a lot of investments in land, and then in the end, like, don't have any like control or say of it. And it's really hard to do that work, and it's really hard to keep working day and day at a thing that you pour your soul into, and that at the end of it, you kind of feel like you have no control about. So I would challenge every person here to go to your local town board and ask them, do they have an agriculture oversight committee? And if they don't, do they plan to? And what steps are they taking to ensure that we are making land access for farming a possibility where you live right now? And also ask them, like, are they keeping Black, Indigenous, people of color farmers in mind when they start setting up these systems and structures? I think a lot of times we look at things like the USDA, which have, there are some great programs in that, but like have a long storied history of basically like racist practice and ideas. And so let's start at our local level, go to your town board, start asking these questions. And, I think I'll just throw in real quick, like on this idea of reparations, I think that the buck gets passed a lot, right? We're like, well, whose job is that? Like, my ancestors weren't here, blah, blah, blah. And I think at the heart of it, it's all of our responsibility. So like, give some Black farmers some money, give some like Indigenous farmers some money, like look at projects that are out there and like reach into your own pocket and support those things. That's one small way in which you can do something that will really like benefit some people where a lot of us are really struggling right now. I know that we're all struggling financially, but I think that we can all take some time and a few dollars like out of our pocket to help communities around us. And let's start looking locally. So, okay, I'll shut up now, and then I'll pass it back off to Karen, and then Costa, and then Laura.
Jayne, thank you so much for those words, because again, when you ask a call to action, definitely around land and housing is paramount, not only in rural settings, but we have a huge we have a huge hunger and homeless population across this country. This country is supposed to be the greatest, and yet we have homelessness. We have poverty, and no one is bringing it to the forefront. We figure that we're going to solve hunger and poverty by putting more soup kitchens and food pantries and making ourselves feel good because we're donating to that. And granted, they do tremendous amount of work, but that's a Band-Aid. That's not sustainable. And then when it comes to homelessness, how many times you see people and you either walk over them as you go into the train station, or you see them as you're traveling along the road? And what is it about us as human beings that we don't have the compassion to deal with housing and food systems? So again, call to action is to make sure that your voices are heard, to promote more access to food, to promote more access to housing. And then let's start having a hard conversation around land back and reparations. And I know it's difficult for a lot of people because people look at land as a sort of power. It's something to have, it's something to own. And we don't own anything because we don't live long enough to own anything. And so I think the conversation says, how can we be stewards and caretakers of the land? Give us land so that we can be stewards and take care of it, and stop thinking about the capitalistic system about owning land that makes people scared because, I have it, and it's mine. Instead of us starting thinking, no, it's not yours. It's nature, it's the universe. And what we want to do is that we want to be stewards and caretakers of the land so that it is left for generations to generations.
And yeah, I guess just piggybacking off what the points you guys are making, and yeah, I really just want to thank everybody again for such inspirational words. I think from one side, from the kind of the permaculture world of really ecologically thought out landscapes. So I think an exciting piece of that is how can we diversify our farmscapes to have multiple businesses nested together, really helping and supporting each other. I think there's a lot of great examples of that, whether that's tree orchards or perennial systems that have vegetable farmers and bring an herb farmer in and bring some cattle in and maybe some sheep, and kind of how do we bring farmers and operations together to create more resilience, because a forest ecosystem has so many things happening within it, right? And so I think the more diverse our landscapes are with plants and people, the more resilient they are, as everyone's speaking to. And then I guess from kind of from the indigenous management side that I've gotten to work a little bit with, I mentioned the native land mapping tool, but I guess the next steps with that is to really figure out where you live, whose land this has been for millennia, and then do the research and do the homework and learn about the history, learn about the wars, and learn about the genocide, and learn about where a lot of those communities were forcibly moved to in the Hudson Valley. The more you go east in this country, the farther those native peoples have had to move west. So that the Lenape people of the west side of the Hudson Valley have all been forcibly moved to Wisconsin, Oklahoma, and southern Canada. So, I think it's really important to not just learn about it, but also take those steps of research, see what's happening, see if there's things you can support and donate to directly. There usually are. And just trying to build those relationships. And if you can, show up at those communities, and just be present and try and see what relationships can come naturally from showing up. Because a lot can happen when you are physically there in person. But yeah, again, just want to thank everybody for the inspiration and pass it off here.
Thanks. Yes. My first thought after thinking about this conversation and what we said here today is I'm going to go back to get off your butt and do something. And what I think about when I think about the possibilities is that we all, no matter where you stand in the food system, no matter where you work, no matter what your political affiliation is, there is something that you can do. So begin to learn more about these issues. Costa was speaking about what I call the long story. Learn something about your place. Learn about who was there before you, before your ancestors, before Europeans were on this continent. Learn about that. And think about what that means in terms of what you can do today and the legacy that the land offers you as an inhabitant of that place. So you can learn your long story, learn something about food, grow some food, do something. The last thing I'll say is that what I have learned in this work is that there are already people doing this in your region, in your community, your local community. If you don't know about it, learn about it and get involved. Because I have worked now for a decade in climate change, and a huge element of this work. Oh, that's what I really wanted to say. We are at a moment in our culture, in our species history, really, we are at a moment when there is such a clear call to action of our species to change our relationship with people and the planet. And so this is the time to act. I don't think there's ever been more already on the ground work going on. Plug into it. What I know is that what brings me hope and gets me up every day and continuing this work is that I work in community with people actually making positive change on the ground. So go out, find somebody that's doing that, learn about your history of place, put all that together. And then the last thing I want to say is just to remember that we all bring advantages and disadvantages to this work. and also that privilege is power. Use yours for good.
Thank you, everybody. Lastly, I want to open up the floor for a little bit of question and answer. I think there is a Q&A bubble in the bottom. Also, if you want to type any questions that you might have in the chat, I'll read those and throw those out to our panelists. Yeah, feel free to toss anything our ways, and we'll see what we can say.
Looks like there was a question about the spiritual relationships to nature in the chat there.
Yeah, could any of you please speak about your spiritual relationship to nature? I guess I'll start off and say that like that kind of like is my spirituality. You know, like I feel like every time I put seeds in the ground and they grow, and then that goes to someone that they eat, and then they continue their life and sustain. To me, that is what's holy. That's what's magic. And so that's a real driving force for myself to do the work that I'm doing. And yeah, I would love to hear any other panelists' ideas on that.
Yeah, I guess I'll go next, because for me, oppression and trauma still is imprinted in my DNA. And at first I had an adverse effect to the land until I put my hands literally into the soil and felt a connection, a belonging. And ever since that time, I've had a relationship to nature. You know, I sit and I stand barefooted, or just sit and contemplate as I imagine, you know, who is on this land of black dirt before me, and pay respect and homage to that. I look at the mountains and the sky, and feel the wind, and thankful for my being, and having that spiritual relationship to the universe, and to be thankful for that each and every day when I'm on that farm, to be thankful that I have been given the gift to be a caretaker and a steward of this land.
I could share one piece that really inspired us on our journey with the Inhabitants Film Project. The Karuk tribe of Northern California is one of the leading tribes right now, bringing back prescribed fire management to their communities, something that's been illegal for them to do for almost 200 years, because the colonial mindset was that it was not good to have fire, and yet for the Karuk people, fire on the landscape is what keeps their homes safe, but also is what regenerates a lot of their foods, like hazelnuts, wild berries, all types of different kind of wild food, but also increases the habitat for a lot of animals they rely on. But part of the Kurdic spirituality is a term called Pikyaev, and there's not a direct translation, but their best translation that they share is, it basically means fix the world people. So part of their religion is the fire management, which is part of their food system, which they believe really is how they can help fix the world where they are and improve the world. And they also have a belief about the world really being on a balance, where what we do here actually affects the other side of the planet in a very real way. So we take a lot of inspiration from that community, and kind of the work they're trying to teach more and more people of California who now live there and have inherited the responsibility of that kind of life way. But I think that applies to all of us, you know, thinking about how can the work we do fix the world, and in that way really has a kind of a spiritual foundation to it.
I'll just share one experience that of a spiritual nature that really changed me. So I got interested in soils and working in sustainable and organic agriculture a long time ago, very much from a sense of caring for the earth and wanting the earth and people to be healthier and better, and to be of service in that way. And about a decade ago, I really started to lean into my own indigeneity and what that means and how I can be better connected to where I am, even though my ancestors came from Europe. And just what that means, it's a really troublesome, maybe is the right way to put it, troublesome kind of a question to ask. Because I believe that the way we are going to achieve this transformation is for us all to be connected to the earth. So short and sweet, I was working with an elder from the area where I live in the Southern Appalachians. And in one conversation, and this just shows how quickly you can have a shift in your feeling, in your spiritual feeling. And I was talking about, fighting for the planet, protecting the ecology of my place. And the elder very, very quietly just said, Laura, you're not fighting for the earth. You are the earth fighting back. And in that moment, I feel that I found my place. I became part of nature. And for me, that was an incredibly powerful moment because I realized I was not out there fighting the evil that's here. I had the earth under me, supporting me. I had my ancestors supporting me. I had all of nature supporting me. I'm just one expression of the earth seeking to heal itself. And that really shifted my sense of belonging, my sense of power, really my sense of agency to just speak my truth as the earth fighting back. So hopefully that means something. It was certainly very meaningful to me. And the way I would describe it is that I went from my mind to my heart. My work went from thinking about science to feeling. And Karen said it really well, feel a feeling of belonging.
Amazing. Thank you, Laura. I guess lastly, let's just end with a quick question of, what brings you hope for the future, as like a filmmaker, a scientist, a farmer, just like a human in this world, what are the things that bring you hope as you move forward and we look at these difficult questions like decolonizing the food system, climate change and all that stuff. And then lastly, like where can folks find you? Where can they find your projects? How can they support you? Feel free to drop things in the chat. I'll start with, I'm currently like a part of a trans farmer cohort through the Cultivemos project of the Hudson Valley Young Farmers Coalition. And that has been really inspiring. For so much of my journey as a farmer, I haven't come across like really any other trans farmers. And now to be a part of a group that is working, we're putting together a project that's going to tell the stories of trans farmers with an aim at trying to increase community, help folks, know that like you're not alone out there in this crazy time where people are literally like passing laws to get rid of us. And that coming together of folks to create a project with passion and to tell stories and to just create that actual community with each other instead of just this idea that maybe there's other people out there feels really important. So lastly, my farm is TransGenerational Farm. You can find me on Instagram at TransGenerational Farm, and I'll put my link to my website in the thing. But yeah, let's pass it off to everybody else. Karen, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I have hope for these kick-ass youth. The youth of today, they are unapologetic, they are energized, they run the gamut of diversity, of voices, they are out there, they're not taking, I'm going to keep it clean, they're not taking a lot of bad things. You know, they're out there marching, they're very vocal, they're diverse. And so my hope is that, yeah, it's the youth, you know, continue to work on youth leadership, can continue to support them. They call me Mama K for a reason, because I'm out there and I'm hopeful that the youth are going to make a difference.
I would just echo that, but also I think there's a role for elders as well. And I am working hard in my own life, and also working with other elders to step back and recognize that the youth have got something new. There's something new happening in the youth, and it feels to me like, at least in some small part of our country, we're breaking loose of old limitations, and I think the youth are leading that. And the role of the elders is to step back and support, step back but support, and allow that leadership and that new way of thinking, support it, promote it, help to cultivate it. That's what gives me hope.
Wow, this wasn't planned at all, but my hope was going to say it was really the transmission of knowledge and cultural experience from elders to youth. You know, it's something that deeply inspired us in the Native communities we spent time with, especially in things like Buffalo Harvest, and you know, really bridging that gap between the elders and the young people. And that, you know, it's something we don't see enough of in our culture and our world today, and especially in the Western world, I would say. But I guess I'd just love to end with saying that, you know, I think it's so hopeful and exciting as well to see farms like Jayne and Karen's farms and others like that we can all directly support and buy from, and really, you know, make that part of our food systems if they're in our region. So, and you know, and continue to learn from places like Glynwood. So I'm just really excited to be here again with all of you, and hope people can find a way to support all these inspiring folks here.
I just want to add, what gives me hope is actually listening to all of you, because this has been an amazing discussion and really powerful. And I love the way that you're able to bridge this incredible down to the very essence of community and up to the big problems that we're looking at, and all the wonderful ways that you have of addressing that. So thank you. I know we don't have a lot of people necessarily watching this now, but I promise you there will be many more. So we have all your information in the chat, and hopefully that more and more people will get to know the work that you're doing, because it's really, really important. So I also want to thank all those people that have joined us today. I want to thank all the people that have supported us financially so that we can continue this really important series. Our next program is going to be on May 25th, and it's entitled Environmental Stewardship, the Business Perspective. Now, this is the first time we've had a business perspective in the last 3 years that we've been doing this. So we have Stephanie Barger, who's with the director of TRUE, which is a green building council in California, Holly Elmore, a CEO environmental impact company from Florida, Simon Lamb, who's an author and has an amazing book, Junglenomics, from the UK, and Tim Trepzer, who is a sports and venue sustainability person from Atlanta. So I'm looking forward to, and these are people who say that there are some business people that do care. So I want to hear that, because as Karen said, there are an awful lot of them that don't. So thank you all. This has been a fabulous discussion, and hopefully much to continue, and we will hopefully see you all again.
Bye, everyone.